and welcome to episode number 6 of The Terror Cellar. Yes, that's right, it's number 6. For me, that's a big deal, okay? It might not seem like many episodes to you, but to me, that's good. I've got to episode number 6, and, it's going really well. I'm really digging doing this, and it's always fun reading out these stories anyway, because I'm just a fan. As I've said before, I'm just a fan of all the paranormal and supernatural, so it doesn't get boring for me. Anyway, I'm not going to waste any more time. I have 2 very creepy stories for your delight in this episode. And the first one is sent in by Marie Gardner, and it is called The Laughing Boy. Not many people I know believe in ghosts. Some of them call me Mad Marie because I can't stop talking about them. But there is a reason for it, a very personal one. I had an experience that was so vivid, so undeniable, it would shake even the staunchest skeptic. It all began in the early 1990s when I lived in an old house in a part of Northampton called Kingsthorpe Village, an area notorious for paranormal activity over the years. I lived there as a single mother with my daughter Tammy, who was then 10 at the time. Being just the 2 of us, we developed a routine and knew every inch of the house. We spent so much time together that we could often guess each other's thoughts before they've even been spoken. She wasn't just my daughter, she was my best friend. We had been in the house for about a year when strange things started happening. It began with little things, like items showing up in odd places. A hairbrush, for instance, was once found under the sink with the pots and pans. At first, I thought I was just being forgetful, but the odd occurrences kept happening. One day, after a walk to the shops, Tammy and I returned home to find the front door wide open and the television blaring loud. I would never leave the house without locking the door, let alone leaving it standing wide open with the TV on. As time went on, these little incidents began to stack up, leaving me on edge. I didn't mention my concerns to Tammy, as I didn't want to frighten her, but inside I was becoming more and more anxious and unsettled. I remember one day we came home to find all the cushions from the sofa stacked neatly in the corner of the living room. Tammy swore she hadn't done it, and I hadn't either. It was as if these strange events were building in intensity, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly off. One night, we were sat in the living room, cosy by the fire and watching TV, when we heard a loud crash from the kitchen. It sounded like a pot had been dropped onto the countertop from a great height. I jumped up and went to investigate, but when I got into the kitchen, everything was exactly where it should be. Nothing had been moved. I stood there for a moment confused, then turned to head back to the living room. As I did, another bang echoed from upstairs, followed by the sound of shuffling, like someone brushing up against the wall. My heart was pounding, but I rushed to the bottom of the stairs and looked up. That's when I saw it. A child's leg disappearing around the corner at the top of the staircase. For a moment I froze, 1,000 thoughts racing through my mind. Was someone in the house? Was this Tammy playing a prank? I called out to Tammy, telling her I was just going upstairs for a moment, and slowly climbed the stairs. I reached the landing, hesitated, then looked around the corner. Nothing. The hallway was empty, but as I turned to head back down, I felt something. An intense pressure, like someone was right behind me on my neck, watching me. I whipped around, and there he was again. A little boy with dark hair grinning as he dashed across the landing, laughing as if we were playing a game of hide and seek. My heart froze in my chest. This wasn't my imagination. I wasn't seeing things. I bolted down the stairs and told Tammy we were going to stay at her grandmother's for the night, and we left the house in a hurry. As we drove away, Tammy asked why I had been running up and down the landing upstairs. But I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told her what I had seen. I knew we had to return to the house and I wanted her to be prepared. In the following days, not quite sure what to do, I called in a medium to help us. She walked through the house, quietly, and then spoke. She sensed the presence of a child, a mischievous boy who enjoyed causing little disturbances. The medium was calm as she asked him to leave us in peace. She said he was playful, but not malicious. But he had to stop scaring us. After that, the house felt different, lighter, less oppressive. There were no more strange incidents, apart from the occasional noise that I guess could be easily explained. Whatever the medium did, it worked. And that's when my obsession with the paranormal truly began. I became fascinated by the unknown, constantly reading about hauntings, spirits and otherworldly phenomena. Though the experience had frightened me, I couldn't help but feel a strange pride. I had seen something beyond the ordinary. It was real. And I've told this story more times than I can count, each time knowing that a few will believe me. But that doesn't matter. I know what I saw. The laughing boy was real, and he left a mark on me that will never fade. Thank you, Marie Gardner, for that great story. That is an amazing little story, that. I think it's one of my biggest fears, of seeing like a little or just something on the stairs, like a face popping around the banister looking at me. I think that's, when I think about what I imagine to be really scary, it's that thought and that vision. And God knows what I would do. I would absolutely shit myself, in all honesty. And I think I would do what you did and just grab the stuff. In fact, I wouldn't even grab my stuff. I'd just run out of the house. I probably would have left Tammy. See you later. And now we have story number 2, which has been sent in by Samantha Knight, and it is called The Vanishing Man. Back in the 80s, I worked at a pub in Leeds, which is the north of England. It was a cosy, old-fashioned place that had probably stood there for over a century. I'm not going to name it, as I don't want to bring any unnecessary attention or hassle to the owners today, but it was one of those real old man's pubs, you know the kind. A far cry from the more modern, almost bar-like establishments that we all see today. This place had character, with dim lighting, wood-panelled walls and heavy furniture that looked like it hadn't been moved in decades. The kind of pub where the regulars had their unofficially assigned seats, and if you were new and accidentally sat in one, someone would politely but firmly let you know. It had a community feel, the sort of spot where people came to spend hours talking, laughing and drinking and smoking. Back then, you could freely smoke indoors, of course. The air was always thick with the smell of pipe tobacco and cigarette smoke, which only added to the old world charm of the place. This was also long before the era of CCTV, which made it feel like everything that happened in the pub existed in a bubble. If you weren't there, you would never know what went down. No surveillance cameras to catch weird occurrences or strange happenings. Everything you experienced in the moment. For the most part, I worked evening shifts. That meant I was usually the one left to cash up, clean the place, lock the doors, and make sure everything was in order before I headed home. Over time, the pub felt almost like a second home. There was nothing about it that ever struck me as odd or eerie. Sure, I'd heard the usual ghost stories that float around old buildings like that, but I never gave them much thought. A couple of patrons would mention strange things, glasses moving on their own or doors that seemed to open by themselves, but I didn't pay much attention. I didn't have any reason to. Well, that is until one night. It was just another typical closing shift. I was wrapping up, making sure everything was in place while the last few customers lingered over their final pints of beer. I saw them out, locked the door behind them, and headed down to the cellar to change a few barrels. You see, the cellar was directly below the bar, so if anything was going on upstairs, you could hear it pretty clearly through the ceiling. But once I was down there, everything was silent, just as it should have been. I was alone. But then, I started hearing noises. Distinct noises. The sound of heavy wooden stools scraping across the floor above me, and the unmistakable clinking of glasses as if someone was moving them around at the bar. I froze for a second, trying to make sense of it. The sounds were so clear, so familiar. My first thought was that I must have accidentally locked someone in the pub. Maybe a customer had slipped off to the bathroom without me noticing. So I rushed upstairs, half expecting to find someone waiting there, embarrassed, ready to apologise for not leaving on time. But when I got to the bar, there was no one. The room was completely empty. The stools, though, they'd been moved. I'd seen them neatly tucked under the bar just a few minutes earlier, but now they were pushed out at least 1.5 meters away from where they had been. It was late and I was ready to go home, so I went back to the till to finish cashing up. The pub was shaped like a letter L. As I was gathering empty glasses from the tables, I turned a corner and my heart nearly stopped. There, sitting at the bar, was an old man. He was hunched over, his back deeply arched as if he'd been leaning on that bar for years. He had on a flat cap and a long beige overcoat, and he seemed to be smoking a pipe. I could smell the rich, sweet scent of the pipe tobacco, and I could even see the faint wisps of smoke hanging above his head. He didn't look familiar, and I was sure I hadn't seen him before. I assumed he must have been in the bathroom when I'd locked up, and that's why I hadn't noticed him. But something about him just seemed off. I walked over and said, "Excuse me, sir, we're closed now. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." He didn't respond. He didn't even turn to look at me. It was like he hadn't heard a word I said. So I said it again, a little bit louder this time, and told him I'd unlocked the door for him. But he still didn't look at me. He just sat there, looking forwards. I turned around and walked over to the front door, unlocked it and held it open for him. But when I turned back, he was gone. The stool he'd been sitting on was empty, and there was no sign of him anywhere. The smell of pipe smoke still lingered, hanging in the air like a ghost itself. I quickly checked the bathrooms, thinking maybe he'd slipped past me again somehow, but they were empty too. That was the moment when the full weight of what had just happened hit me. My hands started to shake and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I grabbed my coat and bag and bolted for the door. I didn't even bother to clean up or turn off the lights. I just ran, locking the door behind me, leaving the pub as it was. That night I couldn't shake off what I'd seen. The image of that old man, hunched over the bar smoking his pipe, haunted me. The next day, I told a couple of other staff members about it, and they didn't seem as surprised as I thought they would. One of them mentioned how every now and then people would smell pipe smoke in the pub when it was completely empty, even though no one smoked pipes there anymore, but none of them had ever seen the old man. After that night, I couldn't bear the idea of being alone in that pub after dark. I asked to switch to day shifts, and thankfully they agreed. In hindsight, I don't think the old man meant me any harm, but at the time I was terrified. It's one thing hearing stories about ghosts, but when you experience something like that firsthand, something that you can't explain, it stays with you. It makes you question what's real and what's not. And that's a feeling I'll never forget. Thank you, Samantha Knight, for sending in that creepy pub story. And that is just great. What was he doing there? This must have been a man who has been sat at the bar, probably over half of his life. He would have been sat at the pub bar, and his mark was so strong that, even after death, he returned to the pub. It was quite eerie how he didn't acknowledge you when you spoke to him. He didn't turn around, didn't look. It's almost like he was in a different plane of existence or a different dimension. He couldn't hear you because he was just doing his thing in his own world. That's why he didn't respond. I guess some spirits can respond to you, but I reckon some are trapped in some kind of void and they're living out their existence in their own way. Maybe he could see more people around that we couldn't see. Thank you once again for listening in to the Terror Cellar, episode 6. And I've been getting some great feedback lately, and it's really nice to read because, behind the scenes, there's actually quite a bit of work goes into these shows. Do you know what I mean? It's not just a case of pressing record and reading out some stories that have been sent in. There's all kinds of stuff that goes on. So, when I get some nice reviews and ratings and stuff, it's cool. It makes me feel good for the hard work we're putting in. But anyway, I'm going to see you next week for another cool story. And remember, this podcast goes across lots of platforms. So whatever you're listening on, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, etc., etc., please go ahead and leave me a review and a rating, and even better, just follow it. Okay, so the more I get of this, the more we can grow the podcast, and you're just basically helping me out. Simple as that. But I'll see you next week. Don't have nightmares. Bye-bye.